I'm unmuted. I've muted you all because it's 10 o'clock and it is Lancaster Woodturners weekly coffee hour. You're going to have to unmute yourself when you want to talk. This is June 1st, 2023, number 154, I think. I'm probably 2 or maybe this will be 3 behind in the editing, but I'll get caught up editing and posting. Let's see. The news, of course, is the AAW Virtual Symposium begins tomorrow. And we actually have 25 group registrants in this, most of them on screen now. And I'm anticipating AAW to send me the codes I need to send on to you all sometime today. And I hope it all goes off flawlessly and all the systems they've set up work really well. We are going to have a coffee half hour at 1 o'clock on Friday and again at 1 o'clock on Saturday. Just a chance for all y'all who are participating in the virtual symposium to check in just like this and have a yak about how it's going. So I'll be online then. I'll open the coffee hour set up, around or a little before 1, probably 1:45. Anybody who wants to check in and talk, welcome to do that. Not on Sunday, just Saturday, Friday, and Saturday. Well, Sunday, then we'll see y'all next Thursday to talk about the whole thing. I'm also going to be on early tomorrow morning to maybe assist with logon issues. I don't know. I hope nobody has logon issues, but just a way to some point of contact, because I do have a phone number. Let's see. Any other announcements? Next Tuesday night, it's really a heavy week for us. Next Tuesday night, Angelo is going to demonstrate the finer points in making his magician's tricks. It'll be a very interesting demo of some really good, accurate, precision wood turning techniques by a master craftsman, Angelo Iafrate, who's a member of our club and a former president of AAW. Angelo's been around a long time. He was a professional turner. His trade actually is he's an architectural masonry specialist. So when they want to fill a lobby with marble in a skyscraper, Angelo's the guy who tells them how many pieces and how big they need to be, and gives the work order to the quarry. So he's a guy with a lot of experience and a lot of chops, and he's going to share a lot of them with us next Tuesday night. Open shop is also, let me see, 2 Saturdays away, I believe. Barry will probably correct me if he's on this morning. I don't see Barry on here yet, but there is an open shop coming up in Lancaster, and of course I'm going to tell you about it as it rises. This is a show and tell. We're going to do raise hand. I have a number of things I'd like to talk about, but I'll break in later on. I'm going to give the floor to other guys right now, and please unmute yourselves if you want to talk. I just had to do that to get a couple of noisy Parkers here to quiet down for a minute. Let me see, who'd like to go first? Ray, you're up there first. What do you got today?
Thanks, John. We were talking about negative rake scrapers. I wanted to show this. This is a Glenn Lucas, and this is big. This is heavy, and this works. So, anybody wants to get into some real serious stuff inside a bowl, this will do it for you.
How thick is that, Ray?
1/4 inch, and it's
how
1 3/8 wide.
That leads right into something I wanted to talk about. I'm going to play here with spotlights because I've only got one screen today. So this is I bought some of the steel that Mike was recommending from Woodcraft, or from Amazon. This is a 1/4 inch thick, 1/4 inch square bar. I ground this spear point on it, negative rake spear point on it last night. And it works like gangbusters. It's really a nice little tool. But what my question is, I have one of those too, Ray, like you're talking about. My question is, what's the best shape for a beading tool? I was taught to bead with a parting tool, and when I do that, my beads are always non-symmetrical. So I'm looking for a reliable way to grind one of these things into a beading tool. And I first thought I needed to grind, the end of it into both sides of the bead, like a little innie in there. But then I realized I can grind the innie on both sides of this here spear point. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I can get the right side and the left side of adjacent beads, and then, keep moving along. I'd like to hear what your better way of doing all that is while you're here, Ray, talking about negative rake scrapers.
If you cut that like a fat parting tool,
Yeah,
it'll work the same way as a parting tool, but it's fat.
Like this.
Yeah, turn that sideways, 38, yeah, but make it like a parting tool. Bring your point over to the center,
Okay.
like a Bedan, but it's fat. You can roll beads with that. And you can part off with it. The thing is as a parting tool, it's taken off a lot of material.
A Bedan has only one bevel though.
Yeah, the way they're shaped, it's square. You're gonna make that just like a parting tool, except
Okay.
it's fat. And you go to roll a bead, it's surprising how nice it does. And you know, you can set up a tenon really beautiful with them because they're so big.
But are you making a bead in a spindle situation or in a faceplate situation?
Spindle situation. I'm making these. I'm making the bead between the bead on the lid of the box. Let me
Well,
get it.
it's my humble opinion that there's nothing beats a spindle gouge to do that job.
Well, when I do it with a spindle gouge, I get an asymmetrical bead. I get a bead that's different. I cannot, and maybe it's me being a clumsy old guy, but I cannot get a bead that's symmetrical. I get a bead that has one curve on one side and a different. It looks like it's not a pleasing shape.
That's because you can't see the cut as well on the non-dominant side.
Yeah.
But I often correct that by doing it left and right-handed. Just you do them more symmetrical that way. But nothing beats a spindle gouge, and it will leave this. You can leave a polished bead in its wake.
I agree with Ernie 100%. But
Yeah.
People who sell beading tools, whether it's Richard Finley or Cindy Drozda, make them exactly the way Ray is describing, where it's really just a fat parting tool. But most people have trouble making a symmetrical bead. It's probably the key thing that's difficult about a bead. And I think Ernie's got his hand right on it exactly. It's your vision of it and maybe your dominant, non-dominant side. And you will find that you always do one end better than the other. And it usually comes down to practice. I don't know how else to say it, but I find if I haven't done it in a while, I need to put a piece of scrap up there and make sure I do them symmetrical. But it's probably the toughest thing to get right, I think, in wood turning maybe.
One of the things I found too, when you're trying to turn a bunch of beads, is turn the non-dominant side first, and then on your dominant side, it's easy to duplicate it. It's really hard to do it the other way around.
What I find is that you need to get into the habit of rolling the bead and not trying to turn the bead. If that makes sense.
I'd be willing to give a little demonstration in a coffee hour, and I would take no more than 10 minutes. And then I'll give you an exercise to do that will allow you to perfect this if you'll do it for a half an hour or a day for a while.
I would be thrilled to have that. That would be exactly what I need.
I will expose myself. I went out and bought a set of pre-ground ones, and I use them all the time.
What do you mean pre-ground? What do they look like?
Beading tools.
They're beading tools. Thank you, Don. They're beading tools. They're made by, I forget the set I got. Did I get them from Robert Sorby? Maybe, I don't know. Yeah,
But I mean, are they have they got a little like crescent shape in here, so they cut the whole bead and you just go jam it straight in?
That's
yeah.
correct.
The biggest challenge I have, and I'm going to regrind the edges on some of them, the two sides of that little dip are too wide and you can't get beads too close without shaving into the other one. So I'm just going to grind it so it's more of a point there. So when I go in now, the trade-off is you're scraping. That's what you're doing there. And it does tear up if the wood's not good, or you're not careful, or you're too forceful, like I might be occasionally. So,
well, the problem too with a scraper is that as you get to where you're getting to the crest of the bead by scraping it, you're suddenly taking the entire edge plus the little flat on either side, and it can sometimes overwhelm you. The only trick I've ever had is the same as a cutoff in a metal lathe, that you rock the tool left and right as you progress to give yourself a little clearance in there. You also often have to go in and grind clearance into the sides of that U shape in the cheaper.
Can I interject? A dozen years ago, I hosted Cindy Drozda for 2 days of hands-on. They were the same each day. This was our morning. The afternoon was doing her finial. We did beads and coves with a spindle gouge, and practice, and more practice is really the secret.
One of the things people have been talking about with Cindy Drozda is I've got one of her beading tools, and it was made out of a rod that was round instead of square. So you're talking about rolling and stuff. How much of that shape of the rod itself is important if you're going to use just a single point for making your bead? Because to me, that rolling makes it, the fact that there's not a flat section on the bottom of the tool means I'm not, you know, for me anyway, that's just a different way of looking at it.
Anybody else? Arthur, you got something in the chat. What did you have to say?
Well, Alan Batty, he recommends for fine beads using a point tool, and you start in a scrape mode and you just twist up and around for a very fine bead. He says you can roll a 1 second bead with that.
With a point tool like this. With a point tool like this.
No, well, I can't tell what your tool. Hold on, let me see. I can see here. No, that's not what he's talking about. A three. Basically, it's a round shaft that's ground on 3 sides.
Ah, yeah, I've seen those.
Triple point tool.
Yeah, that's a 3-point tool, and that's what he recommends is to turn 1/32 beads.
It's painless and fast.
Yeah.
So a round rod ground with 3 facets on it, right? That's what we're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And they're easy to grind. I take a drill bit, an old drill bit, and I just use the shaft side or the solid side, and I just ground them in 3 points. You get the one side done, then you line up that center line on your grinding wheel so that it's exactly centered, and then you just keep flipping it and make sure that thing's centered, and it's very easy to grind.
What size drill bit are you talking about?
A 1/4 inch. What a 1/4 inch is probably all you need, because you're only turning with the point. All your more mass just means a little more stability off the edge of your rest. But that and I watched him do it, and he turned them in seconds. He has a
Allen wrench works good for it too. An Allen wrench is going to have 6 flat sides, and so you can naturally rotate to 3 a 3 grind point.
Yep. Which is harder?
Allen wrench.
Which is harder in steel, the Allen wrench or a drill bit? I know tapping bits are absolutely insanely hard, because I was going to take a forging course and I was going to forge taps, and the guy said you can't do it. The metal won't work. But for drills and Allens,
I've run into an awful lot of soft Allen wrenches, so I would suspect that your drill steel is going to be stronger than your Allen wrench. You don't need to have that strong a steel for most Allen wrenches unless you're really cranking down on it.
Well, Amazon sells these, these rods they're really quite cheap. Mike Peace is right about that. They sell them in all different sizes. I didn't buy any round ones. I bought an assortment of rectangular ones just to play with. I want to make a better. I've got a couple of tools that I've ground out of old tools to make rings, loose rings on goblet shanks and baby rattles and stuff like that. And it's the same. I just bought a bunch of steel so I can fool around with it. These things are really cheap. You get 2 pieces for about $10. And I guess they probably have round rod as well. It's Chinese high-speed steel.
Yeah.
So there's a problem when you buy anything like that offline, and there's almost no way for a homeowner to know the hardness. In a good materials lab, you'll have what they call a Brinell hardness tester. And it's basically a hydraulic bottle jack with a point on it. And there's a gauge to read pressure that you're pumping in, and that will indent a certain standard dimension in depth. And then you read the pressure, and from that you go to your table and you will get a Bresnel hardness number. If they can specify that when you buy it, you know what you're buying. Otherwise, you don't know what you're buying. I hope that helps, guys.
Well, Doug was telling me yesterday about some other way of measuring hardness. Doug, what was that about?
Same idea, just a different scale. I was talking about Vickers hardness instead of Bresnel hardness, but they're both hardness scales for steel. They're both done the same way. It's an indent. The Vickers is a diamond indent instead of a round ball indent.
Yeah, and a parallel American one is the Rockwell,
Yeah, that's right.
which was invented at New Departure Bearings by the two guys named Rockwell that weren't related. It's kind of an
Well, when we're making beading tools, little bitsy little tools like that, do we really care that much about the hardness of the steel?
I've made them out of screwdrivers quite successfully. And actually, if you look back into carbon steel tools before high speed came along, so let's say circa 1970 and earlier, a scraper came from Sorby, anybody else, at about 55 Rockwell and not 60 or to 64 somewhere. And that allowed you to take a hand burnish, a ticketer as Payne called it, and burnish that tool. Now we have to use a tungsten carbide burnish because we're using high-speed scrapers that are 64 Rockwell.
Something that I've been looking into, I used to be an aircraft mechanic, and I have all these old screwdriver tips, magnetic screwdriver tips. Their Rockwell hardness is in the same hardness as tool steel, around 62 to 64. So I've been using those. I made myself my own tools, and I use those tips and sharpen them so I can make any shape I want. They're cheap. I got hundreds of them that were worn out. So that's what I'm using. So that might be an idea for other people too, because the hardness is there.
Files also worked fairly well, very well actually, and was a trick in any old turning book. However, they are at 64 Rockwell and will snap on an overhang. You can draw them back pretty easily in a household oven by setting it to about 475, putting them on a tray in there and letting them just heat up to that temperature and turning the oven off and just leaving them in there until they're cool.
Yeah, that would be a process, right?
You guys have got a point, and to John's question about do you need that hardness? To be honest, you can probably get about 15 screwdrivers at the local flea market, and if you break a couple or find a couple that aren't right, oh well, and if you have to grind them a little bit extra, oh well. It's not really a matter of the tool steel you use. And John and I were talking. It's like, how often do you want to grind it? And if you have to grind too much, throw it out and get a file or something like that. But you're going to cost you 50 cents or 25 cents. Nah. My biggest question is the actual shape of the steel. As I said before, a screwdriver gives you a round shape. So if you file that back, you're going to get a different thing than you will if you have the scraper or the files.
I'm liking the idea of the round tool with 3 facets on it. I've seen those in books. I've never made one or tried one, but that's going to be my next move. And I'll probably use a fat old Phillips screwdriver.
Can I show you these? There was an article in the American Woodturner back in 2007 on the point tool, which spent all its time focusing on sharpening, which is the easiest tool on earth to sharpen. I made my first one from a shock absorber shaft and just a high carbon steel. These are from drill rod, a 1/4 and a 5/16. I actually like the 5/16 diameter. The ones that you buy commercially have a much longer grind on the pyramid, and which allows I just don't this shape I find makes a bead very easily. I use it on bowls mostly, not on
Well,
spindles.
that'll make a larger bead, like more like this than the ditzy little bead I'm wanting to make, which is
But
more
the
like.
quarter inch will do your small bead very nicely. I do that routinely on bowls.
Now, Michael, I do the same thing with a shock absorber strut. They're a little messy to get at, but talk about some beautiful polished steel.
Yep.
And for the smaller diameter, like I think John might be looking for, the hydraulic lift, maybe not hydraulic, air compressed lift for hatchbacks has
Yeah.
about a much smaller diameter.
Yeah.
And I take as much pleasure in making the tools as I do turning wood, but I didn't think anybody else would bother, but thanks.
I first learned about it on rec.crafts.wood turning 22, 23 years ago. There was a lot of discussion of it, and I kept intrigued, and I finally got around to making them when I saw that article in the American Wood Turner. It's a great tool.
I put a link in the chat to a commercial one, John, if you want to look at. D-Way makes one. They call it a teardrop tool. I confess to having one and not using it, but and if you want to make a really tiny bead, you know, I hate to say it, but a skew can do it as well. So there's lots of ways to do this.
Yeah, I've got lots of ways of doing it. I'm back to my problem is making it symmetrical. And I think that Michael had the right answer there. I need to spend an afternoon practicing and just, you know, use up a couple of spindles and see if I can get the bead I want that way.
Do many of you remember Wally Dickerman?
No, yes.
Okay, well, Wally had a beading tool which he would never show. And a couple of people that had seen it alluded to what it was. I think it was a spindle gouge flipped over and ground in reverse. And that makes a really nice beading tool. So take an old spindle gouge, flip it over, and just grind an angle off the other direction, and you'll have a beading tool.
Oh, right. That's the one. Now I'll have the right cove in there. See, that was my other issue. I want to get a little, you know, half demi loon in the end of this rod. Well, can I file this steel? It seems to me it's about the same hardness as my file. And the corner of the wheel is the wrong shape as well. So how would you do that? And you just told me an answer. That's a good idea.
Quarter inch file.
Drill a hole and then cut it in half. Use a very hardened tip drill through your steel dead center, and then just cut off halfway through the hole and ground the sides.
Good plan.
John.
Has anyone watched Steve Jones's latest, or one of his latest videos just a few days ago? He does a bead in a cove and on one piece of wood, and then he turns the bead first, turns the cove, and then parts it and fits them together. So that's what I've been doing to practice, and that gets your eye set for the bead in the cove.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw the tout for that video. That came along. My own video from my demo last month at Lancaster. You wouldn't believe it. It's had 4,500 views. It's the highest viewing we've had, except for Ellsworth.
Really good.
John,
Yeah.
one of the things you can do is there is a place called MSC. They're an industrial supplier, and they sell, among other things, hardened rods. Now, they have.
Your sound's cutting out, Randy. I'm sorry. We lost your sound.
Is that okay?
Now it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, the MSC is a warehouse, an industrial supplier. They have a warehouse that's just above where the set between Interstate 78 and 81 is, near Jonestown. You can order things from them and put down "will pick up," and they will pull them in about an hour, and then you can go up and pick them up. And since they are an industrial supplier, you can be assured
that you are getting what you ordered.
In other words, the hardness is what you're expecting.
Yes, absolutely.
I have not found any hardness issue with this Chinese steel from Amazon for these purposes. I mean, I imagine for some purposes it would turn out to be inadequate, but for what I'm doing, it's plenty hard enough, and it holds a nice burr. So I don't know that I care enough to go driving up to Jonestown.
John, I picked up Cindy Dreisen, the tool I got from Cindy Dreisen for beading, just to show people if you can see that. And I bought it just for the very fine beads you're talking about, and not for coarser beads. And it's actually round ground on the back, so it's, you know, all she's done is set it on her tool, on her grinding wheel, and just rolled it along to grind the back of it, and then it's a flat across the front.
That's what Vortex tool, isn't it?
Yep.
That's not her beading tool.
I know it's not her beading tool. I said that's what I bought it for. I didn't say she'd use it for that. For me, it's a Vortex tool. But for me, it works really well to get into the fine beads because of the point. I was more interested in the fine point on the end for the getting into the fine beads between them, and I find it works fine for me. But anyway, that's just
that's a round rod you're talking about there.
Yeah, it's a round rod.
So it's round on the back and just a flat on the top.
One side, yeah.
Sharpened like a pencil and then flattened off like you took a knife to a pencil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, John, if you look at that D-Way link that was posted in chat and follow through, D-Way itself sells the pre-shaped ones, but they're different than the Robert Sorby, which are just flat metal. They look like, I'm going to look at that more after the meeting, because it looks like something I would be interested in. And you might, if you want to grind them yourself, follow their pattern. They're using kind of a, not parabolic, but a V-groove tool, apparently. I didn't look at it long.
Yeah, I was going to do that's where I took the shape for this point off, was off of a D-Way tool that I saw. I didn't want, they want $100 for it, and I got 2 1/4-inch rods for $9 here. So they look like pretty easy to make, especially with a CBN wheel. And I have, of course, an 80 grit CBN, so it removes metal pretty quick. Sounds like we've beaten this one to death. We're halfway through here, so I'm gonna start giving the floor to other people to show stuff. Is that okay with you guys? I hope okay. Sigler, you got. Whoops, Kai.
Yeah,
go ahead.
John. May I just come back to your question how to work the high-speed steel tool? High-speed steel with tools. So I ground this little hook here for a hook tool out of solid high-speed steel. And what I used is, maybe I have it in front of my face.
Yeah, I can see it.
Put some paper behind it. Yeah,
we can see it there.
Yeah. So what I used is first an angle grinder to grind away as much material as possible. And then I use these, got a whole box of them here. I can show them. These little grinding stones in a Dremel tool to grind away material, but they wear really quickly. So that's why I bought lots of them. And another option is to use these little grinders that also go in a Dremel tool, and they are diamond coated. And
I don't see how you got that shape out of it. What size rod did you start with, or what did you start with to make that? A square rod or what? Rectangular rod?
Yeah, it was square. A square rod. I ground it round, and then I went in. Can you see that? In here or in here with an angle grinder to grind away as much material as possible, but then working the edge of the hook tool, I used the smaller grindstones and diamond coated.
So you didn't forge that in any way. You just ground it out of solid.
Yeah. So I found the best way to work high-speed steel is just to grind it. Other ways, drilling it it's really hard. I mean, you can use tungsten carbide drills, solid tungsten carbide drills to do that, but they break easily. And so grinding, I think, is the best way to give a shape to high-speed steel. So that's just what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay. Well, anybody else dying to add to this before we move along?
Yes,
I don't
John, I have one other thing to add. I went to a workshop one time and they showed a drill bit, and I can't get it in focus here. But if you want to control the diameter of a bead, this is a scraping tool, but you can use any size diameter to make it work to your bead size. Just grind.
You're just grinding you're just grinding the end off the drill bit and using the flute, yeah?
Yes.
Wow, you guys are so ingenious.
That's not my idea. This is someone else's. But if you
what
notice,
what diameter is that drill bit? Half an inch, it looks
this
like.
one is probably 5/8.
5/8. Yeah. Anybody else?
Wow.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a great discussion. I just love this group. Everybody's got great information here. Ziegler, you got stopped last week. You wanted to show us something. What do you have?
Well, I was going to show you, I'm trying to think of what I can give to my my mother-in-law, because she's 90 years old, lives down in North Carolina, and she seems to like hearing about wood turning. So I was trying to figure out what I could make her. So I went on Mike Peace's YouTubes and just was scanning that, and he was talking about, I don't think he calls them weed pots, but whatever he called them, I thought, well, they're nice and small and that won't take up much space for her. So I just got 3 pieces of wood, a piece of walnut, a piece of canary wood, and a piece of maple, and I turned these 3 little pots, and I found some grass, dried grass that was outside of the house, and I stuck them in there. I haven't given them to her yet. They're not sophisticated, and the reason I didn't show them last week is because after the conversations, I felt kind of inadequate as far as showing this stuff to everyone. But it was fun turning different shapes, and again, I'm still learning, so it gave me an opportunity to use different tools and figure out what worked well. So I turned these three pots, or 3 things. I noticed that the canary wood has split now, so there's a split that's going vertical in it for some reason, and it was dry, but maybe not dry enough. Anyhow, and then I also thought I'd make her a small bowl, and I had a piece of ambrosia wood that was also dry, and I was having a hell of a time. I was getting lots of vibrations on my machine. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I don't know if it's because the bedways, I checked them out, and one of the bedways seemed not to be perfectly level with the other. I thought maybe that was doing it, so I jacked up one of the legs a little bit, and that seemed to reduce it. But the one you can see here, let me see. So the one on the right is the one that I was working on. The one on the left, it turned out, was my first bowl that I made on anything that I turned on my lathe. And when I came back inside, I realized they were almost identical in shape. However, like my second bowl, things weren't going real well with the one on the right. I mean, it's a nice piece of ambrosia, but the vibrations and everything. So, and there was a split that I encountered midway, so I had to shorten the bowl, the depth of it. Then it was going fine, and I knew that I was getting close to the bottom. And when I was trimming off the tenon on the bottom, of course, I went through the bottom of the bowl from the outside. So I thought, well, this will give me an opportunity to try to fit a piece in the middle. So I put a piece of walnut in the bottom of it, and I managed to get that fitted pretty well. Trouble is, when I was trying to turn the outside of it, it was so tight in here that I really couldn't get a good job inside of the between the walnut and the maple. But
I'm going to kill your chair so we can all see that a little better.
Okay.
Unless you got more slides to show.
I don't. Just
you want to show us while you're there? You want to show us slides of the wood you got at the auction?
I'll have to come back to that. I mean, I don't want to bore you with me going through trying to find it.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the share then, so you can hold
Okay.
that bowl up and we can see it again, because otherwise
Okay.
you're small on people's screen and they don't know how to make you big.
Okay.
Okay, so
So
that's a walnut plug in there.
yeah, that's a walnut plug. And I will say between these two bowls, the first and the second, you can't tell online really, but the bottom of the first one, it's not very smooth and the transition is not great from the bottom to the sides. I will say that even though I turn it through the bottom of this, the transition is fairly seamless. But I thought the wood on this was really interesting.
John,
And so is the grain direction in that plug matched to the ambrosia?
I turned it 90 degrees. I don't know if that was the proper thing to do or not, but I thought I just turned it 90 because it's clearly a plug.
So it might move differently then.
Oh, I'm sure it will. But they were both dry, so I'm thinking maybe even though they'll move a little bit, we'll see what happens.
So what did you do to get that transition the way you wanted it?
Inside, you mean?
Yeah.
I guess I used a combination of the Boxmaster and then one of the Sorby large scrapers to the extent that I could get it to make a nice transition from the bottom to the sides.
hey, you are now officially a member of the Funnel Club. You know that because
Well,
you
actually, I've been a member for several months because my second bowl that I turned, it was a nice cherry bowl and the shape was interesting, and I managed to go through the bottom from the inside there.
Oh, it's just a creative opportunity, and you did wonderful with the walnut in there.
Well, let me tell you, that was not not to take up too much time, but I turned it last week, I guess. And I thought, oh, I'll just go out and I'll turn this quick bowl for my mother-in-law. And one thing after another was going wrong. And then I overcame everything and I was pretty pleased with it. And I turned it upside down, reverse chucked it to take the tenon off. And I said to myself, I should probably stop now and just sand it. And at that second, I heard this little, that sound. And I saw a little tiny hole in the bottom of it. So instead of getting aggravated, I thought, well, this will give me an opportunity to see if I can put another piece of wood inside and match the diameter. And I came really close. It's not perfect, but.
Here's a clue. When you got it inverted like that, if you haven't measured it before, just tap on it and you'll start hearing that sound that says, oh, I better not put the chisel to that. It's going to go right through.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Jim. And I knew I should have measured it. And I thought, no, this is good. I only got one more little scrape here to get the tenon off the bottom. And that's when it happened. But again, instead of getting aggravated, I said, okay, well, I'll just go get a piece of walnut and I'll contrast it and I'll throw that in the bottom. And that was another learning opportunity, as Doug said.
I don't think, John, I don't think there's a person on the call here today that hasn't had precisely the same experience at some point in their turning career.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, so we're not actually laughing or what, we're sympathizing, said, been there, done that,
well,
understand.
Again, it was supposed to be a quick deal. I said to my wife, I'm just going out in the shop for a little bit. And I said, well, I might as well turn a bowl. And then
you went down the rabbit hole, buddy. You went down the rabbit hole.
I was there for several hours and she's outside taking care of her garden. And she comes walking in. She goes, what are you doing? I said, you don't even want to know.
So I'm glad you fixed it. I have a feeling a lot of the guys just threw them in the trash, and that just hurts me. That's a piece of wood. Just make it better. So.
Well, and I'm not diminishing, trying to make something nice for my mother-in-law, but she doesn't care if I fill the bottom. I mean, she just likes having something. I said to Patty, I was going to give it to you, but when I did that, I thought, well, maybe it's better in North Carolina in her house because she's just going to look at it and put stuff in it, or who knows what she'll do with it. But
well, she doesn't even know you turned through the bottom. She thinks you just did that to make a pretty bowl.
Yeah. Well, plus I don't know how good her eyesight is, so maybe she won't even notice the imperfections in the underside.
One of the things I use them for is to make a base for another bowl. I just make the funnel and make the base.
Good idea.
Funnel to
I like
funnel.
that, Arthur. I like that.
But I do have a question for you guys because again, I typically don't get these vibrations, but the other day I thought, well, because my tailstock and my headstock weren't perfect alignment, the tip to tip wasn't perfect, I would loosen the headstock, rotate it ever so slightly, and then cinch it down, and I turn, and it seemed to be okay. Well, the other day I thought, well, someplace I saw, well, maybe the legs aren't level and the bedways are twisted, so I tried to level them, and in doing so, I got the tips, headstock and tailstock to meet, but then when I was turning it, even after, I put a tenon on it and then flipped it, put it in a chuck, but even when I turned straight across on the chuck piece of wood, I kept getting this vibration. And so then I put a ruler, flat edge, and I could just see the smallest bit of light on the back bedway. And I thought, well, maybe that wasn't a good strategy to align the headstock and the tailstock. Oh, I got one of those. And I used it, Arthur, but I don't know. So I changed the level of the back leg again, and I got the bedways flat across, bedway to bedway, and the vibration went away. But I have a feeling now that the headstock and the tailstock once again aren't going to be aligned.
Ernie, are you still on here? Can you talk to this? You know a lot about this.
Yeah, leveling a lathe is fairly important. And in fact, if a lathe sits for years cocked, if you will, the leg's not bringing it level, it can actually warp the bed.
Yeah.
There's lots of commercial grinders that'll regrind that kind of stuff. But for the most part, putting a really good builder's level on each end of your lathe and then turning the leveling screws until you get equal bubbles. I've got right. This is a machinist level that was my grandfather's, actually. It was a Stanley, and it was made in, I don't know, the late 1800s. But it has a very accurate bubble in it. And it's for just that purpose, is leveling machines. But it should be the part of any installation. And it's really why I don't like to move lathes around very much, that you should plop them down, level them with not wood, with metal or formica or something like that, and then leave them.
So that's interesting, Ernie. I have a digital level. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's a digital level. And so I leveled both ends across the bedways, and then I leveled it, along the bedways until I got it dead level on all three measurements. And each foot has a heavy duty screw and bolt that I could level it up and then cinch it down so it doesn't move back and forth. The whole thing sits on a 3/4 inch thick rubber, I guess they're horse stall mats, because I like having something like that. It reduces vibrations, plus it's easier to stand on. And I had that all perfectly level. But that's when the tailstock and the headstock were just not perfect. So I thought, well, maybe, like I said, I'll change one of the legs and see if I can bring them level to one another, both vertically and horizontally, and I did. And that's when I guess I set it out of level, and I was getting the vibration, so I put it back so it's more or less level. And now I got to figure out how to adjust, I guess, the tailstock, maybe shim it somehow.
What is the brand of the lathe?
It's a Nova Galaxy. It's a Nova Galaxy, and I got it last September.
Well, it would not be uncommon, but I think in a wood lathe, you really don't have to worry about tailstock alignment greatly. And yes, you're either drilling with it or metal spinning. But you could actually be off 1/8 of an inch on the average spindle, and it would make no difference whatsoever. And most faceplate work is done without the tailstock, except for drilling.
Yeah, I would
Have you-
say it was
thinking-
probably a millimeter out of alignment, maybe a
I'm kind of
millimeter.
thinking that it's your headstock bearings are the problem. The bearings are worn.
Have you guys thought about the fact that sometimes with a one piece of wood with a slightly off density, it'll rattle like nobody's business, and it happens to be the piece you put on, not necessarily the lathe, that causes the vibration.
I thought about that, Doug. I wondered if that was the case. It's a piece of ambrosia, and like I said, it was dry.
Yeah, well, just the density, sometimes the densities can be a little bit different. I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know that as soon as I start to press too hard, that I can start getting a bit of chatter that I'm creating with my own tool, even though the lathe is perfect. And
Yeah.
I see that chatter, and so I really have to back off on my technique if I'm seeing the chatter. It's not, the lathe isn't shaking or vibrating, but the tool is rattling like nobody's business.
Yeah.
Because I press too hard, and then it seems to cut unevenly if you press too hard, and then you start getting the oval
Yeah.
shape.
That's
Anyway.
the most common situation is people are leaning into the tool rather than maintaining pressure down on the tool rest.
Right.
And the
Well,
other-
I appreciate everybody's insights. I will go back and re-level the bedways, side to side and front to back, and just see what it looks like. And even if the tailstock and the headstock are a millimeter or half a millimeter out of alignment, I'll just see what that does when I turn my next bowl.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me also is that you might consider taking a big hole punch and punching holes where the bolts out of the legs go through the horse mat and putting it on cement. It could be that the mat is flexing enough that you're getting some error there.
Huh.
Yeah.
One thing you could also consider checking is check the run out. Just put a dial indicator on your chuck and on your spindle and just verify that your spindle's actually spinning on circle. Because if it's out 2 or 3 thou, that'll introduce some vibration that would be hard to find.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
just last night I lined up mine because I have a rotating headstock and I hadn't locked it tight enough, and suddenly I realized it was out. Anyways, when I shoved the center point in the headstock, rotate, I said, "Holy cow! The headstock, the center point itself wasn't centered." So I was chasing my tail. I think it was a headstock seating in the M2 that was MT2 that wasn't working right. So that's another thing to think about. That's what Bert was mentioning. I think if you're out a little in the whatever center point you're using, you're going to be off too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a dial indicator that I can lend you if you want to try that.
Okay. Thanks,
I
John.
think Ernie probably has it right, John. The Nova is not a very heavy lathe, and it may be more likely that you're out because of that rubber mat. I still have a Nova 1624 somewhere, but I seem to remember in it there is in the directions it talks about how you line up those points, because it's not just where you come close to it, is it out linearly as well. So there are adjustments to fix that, but I'm also skeptical that that's really the source of your problem.
Does the Galaxy have a split ways, or is it one solid piece? My Nova DVR has split pieces, so you got to really be careful on the alignment of those.
When you say split pieces, I'm not sure what that means.
Well, are there segments to your ways?
No, they're just two continuous ways.
Oh, okay. A lot of the Novas in the early days had what I called 1 or 2 segments to it.
No, this was a 2022 machine that I just got, like I said, last September.
Okay.
I mean, it's not light. It's not like a Powermatic. It probably weighs 430 pounds or something like that.
Okay.
But I will go re-level it, and then at some point, John, maybe I'll take you up on that dial to see what the headstock looks like.
Okay.
Hey all, I'm jumping in here. I'm kind of new to the group. Well, actually, this is the first time showing up, but the conversation was interesting to me. I have a Nova 2024 that I've been using for a good while. And about headstock, tailstock alignment, it really does make a difference especially for things like if you're thinking you want to jam chuck something,
Right.
either against the vacuum chuck where there's a rubber gasket, and if that tailstock point is off by a millimeter, you will grind that rubber right into that, or I mean, it's going to scuff badly. So I mean, I was having those problems, and I went through a lot, including taking the two sections of the bed apart, because it seemed to me that the tailstock end of it was not quite, you know, their fit and finish wasn't very good. I've used files on the ways and stuff. Anyway, I got it as close as I could. Then what I do is whenever the headstock is swiveled, when I bring it back, I make sure that I have it locked in and jiggle it, you know, to get it seated the best. And then I have one of those two-ended tapers.
Yeah.
You know, blow out the bore and the headstock, you know, put that in, and then bring the tailstock up and carefully move them toward each other. And you'll see the alignment be off, because if you're continuously turning the headstock and moving this tool into it, it stops.
Right.
And then you loosen the headstock swivel and start jiggling it as you turn it in, and you find that it does move and it does line up somewhere different. And so I was able to get that, but still there was a slight alignment that I couldn't get out of it unless I put a 10,000ths of an inch feeler gauge under the backside of the tailstock on the far side of it, just to tilt it toward me. Just it raises it up and tilts it toward me, and they line up perfectly, and I don't get scrubbing. As far as your headstock bearings, you know, it's unlikely that you've done any damage to those things. Those things are tough, and they will run true. If you put a center in there with a point, and the point is wobbling, that's just because it's not seated right, just because there's dust in there. You know, if there's some misalignment, it'll just be untrue, but it's not going to wobble. Anyway, I hope that helps.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's input. I got some things to go check.
John,
but since I'm talking, I missed. Can I see the piece that vibrates? Ah, right.
I mean, it's not big. It was
right.
You know, probably a 6 or 7 by 7 blank by maybe 3.5 inches thick.
I'm guessing that all that. Yeah, I think the difference between the densities of the wood, although I don't see anything hugely obvious, but
yeah,
I've had light pieces. I've had a piece of holly that can't weigh more than 5 ounces, and it'll just shake to beat the band because all the weight is on one side. But
Mark,
John,
Mark, where are you coming in from? Mark Banca, where are you coming in from?
Durham, North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Well,
okay.
Yeah.
And how you're new here, so let me just ask you, how long have you been turning, and what kind of things do you make, and can you hold something up?
Yeah, I've been turning about 12 years. I make bowls. I just make bowls from logs, so pretty much everything is twice turned. I'm one of those weirdos who always points the bowl out from the tree. I never aim the bowl in. And give me just a second, because there's a bowl right behind me here.
well, he's John Ziegler, Doug Reeser here. If you want somebody else to come and take a look at your lathe as a second pair of eyes, I'd be willing to come over to your place if you want to.
Oh, I'd love that, Doug. Only because, like, I mean, except for this group, you know, this first lathe I've ever had, first turning I've ever done, and somebody that's been doing this would be wonderful.
Well, yeah, let's arrange a time and date sometime, whenever you want.
I'll come with you and bring the dial indicator, and we can play around with it.
All right.
So I'm back in. I want to show you something. This is a fairly recent.
Oh wow!
Oak bowl. This is white oak, twice turned. It's finished with a mixture of India ink and natural varnishes and turpentines. Anyway, it has a couple stains on it. Unfortunately, these were in the log, and I darkened it to try to see if I could blend it a little bit, but they still show. Anyway, I still like the bowl. And just one other is, this is natural edge. Obviously, nice piece of walnut.
How'd you keep the bark on, or did you glue it back on?
Never touched it. Yeah, I don't use any glue. This was turned very, very wet, and turned just once turned then. But yeah, I like being able to keep the bark on, and turning them very green is, I think, the biggest help to doing that.
Did you
Anyway,
say that
so
was
that's my intro. Pardon?
that a single turn, that last one with the bark?
Yes.
How do you keep the black bark shavings from darkening the sapwood?
On some it does a little bit, and I guess this did. So yeah, I'm not the person to ask on that. Although a lot of it is just darkened with a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Do you try to harvest your wood when the sap's down to have more bark retention?
I didn't. I don't always know when I'm going to get the wood. I did get this stuff in March, so of course we're in North Carolina, so it's not like I'm thinking the sap was rising because the leaves were coming out, and the so the bark has the top really dark layer that we know is bark, and then there's a little bit of cork underneath that before the cambium. So
that's the inner bark. That's the inner bark. Yeah.
Okay, but it's really cork-like, right? So what was interesting is when I turned this, that inner bark, that cork section, was very thick. It was at least as thick as the bark itself. And then when trying to just dry it a little bit so I could do the surface sanding on it, what I noticed is this stuff, wow, like a sponge. I mean, holding huge amounts of water. I guess that's its purpose. But by doing the whole thing green and keeping it green, I never let my pieces be out in the air. From the time I get the log and cut it, I always keep it in plastic and turn it right away, pretty much. But I don't want any of the moisture, because I think that's when you lose a lot of the bark strength, because things start drying at uneven rates and this cork starts giving up water. And so to keep everything pretty much all similar until I can get the sanding done, and then I flood it with something like walnut oil while it's still wet. And that's been working pretty well for me. It really slows the drying down a lot.
That's a nice technique. Do you then put them in a drying cabinet, or how do you do? What do you do next?
No, I finish it wet and I put it on the shelf, and then it's because I have it so either walnut oil or a turpentine, natural varnish. It just slows all the moisture loss by so much that I think, then you don't get the big difference between the inner bark drying and the outer bark, where you start to get weakness and have it come off. So anyway, you might want to give something like that a try next time you get a natural edge.
All right, I'm going to thank you for all of those comments. That's an excellent discussion. I see we're leaving some hands up here, and we'll get to you next week because we're almost on the hour. I also wanted to notice that we have a couple of other new people here. I'm talking to you, Sherry Willits. Maybe you'll show us some pictures of your work next week or the week after. We would love to get to know you a little bit. We generally like to have new people who show up here, introduce themselves, and show us some work like Mark just did. And that gets you into the conversation, because that's what this is a conversation we have every week at from 10 to 11 o'clock. And since it is a stroke of 11, it's 10:59. I'm going to just look forward to seeing you all, or most of you all, many of you all. We sold 25 tickets in this group to the AAW Virtual Symposium. So, and I see an awful lot of the faces who I know are going to be on that on this screen now. So we'll see you all through the weekend, and I hope you all enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Have a good week, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Wood shop. Thank God for wood.